All right, it is at last time to take a look at this Red Eyes Dark Dragoon profile. We have been tinkering in the lab a little bit. It's a control strategy, which is not one that I normally play, but it is so much fun to play some of these older cards like Dark Magician and Red Eyes Black Dragon that honestly, like, it's just worth it. And this guy, I'm gonna argue and say that this is the best fusion in the game. At least at the moment, with so much targeting, it's a negation, it gets bigger, it is a burn machine as well. This thing just really does it all. And if your opponents disrespect it, which frankly a lot of people do, they will get absolutely clowned on. So anyways, let's go ahead and get on into the profile here. We'll go ahead and start with the main deck. And of course, we're gonna start with our classic, the Red Eyes and the Dark Magician. Just so cool to see these guys in action again. So yeah, those are your fusion pieces, as it were. But really the goal is to foolish them out of the deck. And so obviously in terms of monsters, that's gonna involve Albaz because we're using the branded fusion, of course. So branded fusion is going to get us there, and because of that, we do need 2 copies. Having 1, it does come up. Not to mention, we can use our extra deck to use Albaz. You know, let's say if we don't have access to the Dark Dragoon, we can normal summon Albaz and try to break their board that way. So there's a few tricks up our sleeve in the extra deck. And then in terms of accessing our branded fusion, having 2 extra copies here with Luber is nice. So I've got the odds right now of opening a branded fusion in a 47 or 46 card deck right here to about 80% on the opening hand, starting with 5 cards. And so because of that, I like having the multiple quote unquote copies of branded fusion. Obviously, the best thing you're gonna wanna use here is Red Eyes fusion, but you're not always gonna have access to that, and you need other ways to get out the Dark Dragoon. And so in terms of the Red Eyes fusion though, it really is the best card in your deck. This, you have to give up your normal summons or special summons besides the Dark Dragoon, but it's fine. I mean, honestly, this is such an oppressive card because you're bringing out the Dragoon unless they respond with an Ash Blossom. And that's it, really. There's no other way to interact because, I mean, maybe they have some other form of, you know, Omni negation, but this is really it. So I'm a huge fan, and because of that, we're gonna be playing 3 extra copies of it with the Insight and the Wyvern. So the Insight works by you send a Red Eyes card, which will be this Wyvern, and then you get to add a Red Eyes spell or trap, which is great. Send a Red Eyes monster. And so the Wyvern's, you know, decent. Of all the Red Eyes to send, this is definitely the right one because if you don't normal or special summon a turn, you can banish it from your graveyard and bring back a Red Eyes, which could be the Dark Dragoon because he does have Red Eyes in his text. So yeah, that's a nice little way to monster reborn it, worst case. It has come up a couple times, but it's not the most common in the world. So, you know, we've got at least 3 copies of each of the Red Eyes fusion package to really have our best fusion summon. The second best is going to be your branded fusion. So we do want to max out on that as well by running 3 copies as well. So with the branded fusion, you're most likely going through the Lubellion line to send a Dark, which will be your Dark Magician and the Albaz. And then, you know, Dark Dragoon does allow itself to use a Dragon Effect monster, which could be the Albaz. But the Dark Magician is a required material, so we're almost always sending Dark Magician in that. There are times, though, where you want to branded fuse and access your, you know, standard branded part of the engine as well. There's really a little bit of reading depending on what your opponent's playing. You don't want to just blindly make Dragoon in this deck. It really does benefit from being a little bit more heads up as to how you can best counter them. And then the opening is really just one extra way of getting to an Aluber, which branches into the branded fusion. So this rounds out our count. And so I'm a big fan of having multiple ways to access the best fusion in your deck. So this is the ratio I'm digging in terms of just your start. You're going to be doing a lot of siding out, and in terms of, you know, accessing Dragoon, you're going to have to prioritize whether you want to go for that, or for your opponent, you know your opponent's going to be setting up a bunch of interruptions. You might even take out the opening in the Alubers, so you're really just activating a power fusion spell and getting your play started there versus relying on this card or your Aluber to basically require you to use your normal summon and then play into some really nasty interruptions. So yeah, there's the opening just as an extra way to access branded fusion. And then if we're looking at our kind of more consistency cards, we do want to have our prosperities in here. So triple prosperity is great. It really does help out rogue decks, and we're not doing any draws besides you know, maybe something with a talent, but besides that, really the prosperity is going to fix our hand. Look 6 cards deeper, it's incredible. And so that really pairs with now the control side of things, which this shouldn't be a big surprise. I think a few people are on the Secret Village, this meta at least right now. But yeah, this is a no-brainer here, right? You've got your spellcaster, and this thing says as if you have a spellcaster, your opponent can't bleed. If only you have a spellcaster, and your opponent can't use spells. So this is a great way to shut them out of a third of the cards in the game, and they basically have to find some way to out. Now it does come up if they out your Dragoon that you might be locking yourself, but there's a few ways to get around it. One, obviously you can use your Wyvern to reborn your Dragoon without having to commit more spells to then keep the lock going. But you are also playing some extra field spells. So I do have a third Necro Valley. I couldn't seem to find it. So you would play the third one here. And this is just another basic floodgate, essentially, that you can kind of toggle between to determine which is best going to interrupt your opponent. So I'm a huge fan of Necro Valley. Everything is using the graveyard this format, but thankfully you don't really need it as much. And so because of that, Necro Valley is really, now obviously it does have a little bit of a confliction with the branded fusion, but you're usually activating this after you've done all your plays. But worst case, this can be a decent floodgate in and of itself to pass over to your opponent and basically force them to deal with it. And then because we're running so many field spells, obviously we're running the terraforming, but we're also going to be playing the set rotation as just extra ways to get into our floodgates. And so if I did the math correctly on the Yu-Gi-Oh! Party website, I believe there was maybe a 50% chance to hit Dragoon and get to a floodgate, which was really nice. And that's considering a third Necro Valley. So there is some math here to kind of basically ensure that we're going to have some way to basically slow down the pace of the game, because we're really just trying to go into big chungus that can negate and go from there. So then in terms of a few ways to insulate ourselves, talents is great, you know, just in general, playing around hand traps and stuff like that. But this is going to pair up with some cards we'll see in the future, including a singleton droplet. And that's really because we're on the triple cross out here. So with this, we really need our Red Eyes Fusion to go through. So in addition to the Call by the Grave and the triple cross out, this is really a way to prevent ourselves from some things that might break our board. Talents is nasty against us because it can take the Dark Dragoon. The droplet can negate the Dark Dragoon, and then of course the crossouts and the called bys, you know, are using these cards, or at least the crossouts are. And crossouts can also stop yourself from hand traps, which obviously we're going to be playing quite a few of. So these are all of our basic defensive cards before we get into the hand traps themselves. So this is our engine, really nice. We have our nice little basically floodgate side of the things here, and then we're moving into our defensive cards. And then alas, let's go ahead and get on into the hand traps themselves. So triple imperm, and again, all of these are really great with the crossouts as well because you can play around them yourself. Triple dimension shifter. So here's the thing, we don't really need our graveyard set up that much, not to mention branded fusion, you know, plus the Lubellion is shuffling back from banished as well. So this is really nice to have because this essentially can be one of the big turn skips for dropping a high impact hand trap. So I'm a big fan of Dimension Shifter in this strategy. The biggest conflict, really the only conflict that I see, is it does not let you use the Insight because the Insight needs to send for cost to set up your graveyard. This thing requires nothing in your graveyard, so something to consider there. But if you have the 2 in your hand already, you're doing pretty good. So you really get to pick which route you'd rather go. Everything else, including all of the hand traps that you'll see that we're running here, are intentionally designed not to conflict with Shifter as much. So with that, of course, we're playing Ash, and Ash is important because we also need to prevent our opponent's Ash Blossoms with the crossout designator. So that's why we're on 3. We always want some in deck for our crossouts, and having some in hand is nice too. And then we are in double Mourner as well. This one discards. We're not going to conflict with Dimension Shifter. Really nice to have some additional monster effect and negation. And then we do have 2 hand traps here that would potentially conflict with Dimension Shifter. But the reason we need these in our deck, main deck in particular, is because one, they are very good in this format, I believe. But in addition, these are lights, and we need to be able to access Albion from our branded fusion monsters, because there are times in which we've set up our graveyard already and we then want to banish from our graveyard to bring out, let's say, another Dragoon or something like that. So having some lights are important for using your graveyard as a follow-up if you have branded fusion, on turn 3 and beyond, turn 2 or 3, depending on which turn you're going. And so because of that, we do have the 2 lights here, and those are important. So I will note that there's a slight conflict with Dimension Shifter, but I think they are nonetheless still great to see. You're not going to have a bunch of these conflicts come up in terms of your actual gameplay. And so because of that, I think you need a high hand trap count, and we have more in the side deck because you really need them in this format. So that's it for the main deck here. We're going to go ahead and get on into the extra deck. So with regards to the extra deck, this is a Dragoon-based deck. So we're going to be running 3 Dragoon here. And there are ways to, I've had at least games where I can get 2 Dragoons out and you're guaranteed to win almost. But, this deck can theoretically pump out 3 Dragoons. I would say maybe it's on a 1 Dragoon per turn clock, but it can definitely do that. But if you have 3 Dragoons, why are you still playing? You've already won. So then you have double Lubellion, and this is because this is our best branded fusion opener, because we want to be sending our Dark Magician, and this is the Dark Fusion. So that's why we're using that. It also is really nice because it shuffles back. So there are definitely some plays that come up where you can shuffle this itself back as the Dragon requirement, because you might not want to be playing into Super Poly. It's best probably end on just the Dragoon going into your opponent. So that's why we're at the 2 with that. And then double Mirror Jade. This could be a flex spot if you're not trying to play a little bit more of a aggressive branded side of things. You could maybe cut this down to 1. I personally like it at 2 because it does have the ability to apply a lot of pressure on its own. It gets your engine going, it can remove cards, it's big. So I'm personally a fan of 2. It's a good fallback too if your Dragoon stuff stops going your way. So then we've got the Albion. This is, like I was saying, a great follow-up. Not to mention if it is, sent from the extra deck to the graveyard, you can use it in the end phase to set up some more branded shenanigans. And then Rinbrum is nice because this can actually be a bit of an interruption, right? If you can get this thing from the extra deck to the graveyard, you can use this thing to, while it's in the graveyard, you can basically target a Fallen of Albaz and then special summon either that monster or this card. You're almost never making this card. You're just basically banishing this card to special summon the Albaz. So then basically Albaz your opponent on the opponent's turn. So that's quite nice. But something to consider with all of these branded fusions here, besides the Mirror, even the Mirror Jade themselves, is we're basically buffing Albaz to be able to fuse with more of your opponent's monsters. So we can fuse with a Dark, anything from the extra deck basically, a Light, a Beast, Beast Warrior, or Winged Beast. We can use a level 8 or higher monster. We can use a Dragon monster. This is also nice into Dragon Link. You can set Albaz and then basically wipe their whole board. Really, really nasty because it's 1+ Dragon monsters. So nasty the way this thing is worded. And then Titanic Lad lets us do a 2,500 or more attack monster. And so with all of these are all fantastic because these do things in the graveyard, and these basically are really oppressive boss monsters. This is a combo enabler, obviously. So that's our branded package here. And then we just have a very, very tight, the remainder of the extra deck, basically, just to kind of round out some of our matchups here. And that'll start with Garua. Let's say we get Maximus or something like that. Let's take some free draw power. This deck certainly needs it. So using this on the opponent's turn is really, really great. And then the Typhon. So I think this is a really great option to have just in case. The Dark Dragoon hard loses to Typhon, but this thing can just pop out of nowhere. And so if you can just use your Red Eyes Fusion, you're playing around Typhon, but your opponents, they have to consider this card as well. So just having this as an option in the extra deck is really, really nice. It's not only a floodgate, removal, it's also a big body. And let's say your Aluber gets stopped or something like that, and you need to try to at least break through your opponent's board. This is gonna be something, right? And then the last thing here is a Dark. It's a spellcaster, it's great. It's a Link monster, it's great. More than half your deck is Dark, or the monsters you're summoning, at least. And so this is just really important to have as, let's say you get clogged or something like that, you need to link some monsters off, you need to clear the way. This is really just your insurance for that. So that rounds it out here with the extra deck. So let's now finish with the side deck. So this is where it gets kind of fun here. As we can see, we are on the Eldritch, the Golden Lord. So this is kind of fun because we're playing branded cards, right? Which means we can send this from our deck to the graveyard and use this as interruptions against Runic Stun or random matchups where we need some spot removal. Our branded fusion can access this as spot removal. Not to mention, he's a fantastic light. So while it's not necessarily a hand trap, definitely a solid card to have in our corner nonetheless. But like I did mention, there are quite a few hand traps in the side deck as well, and that's because you just need them. And so we are on the double effect Baylor to round that out. We are on the double Ghost Ogre, so that means that we are now at triple copies of each when we're signing them in, and then that third copy of Mourner as well. So this does round out our hand trap lineup because, like I said, it's really important to have some extra ones. And if you're going second into your opponent's board, you really want to get rid and side out the floodgates because your opponent's already setting up. So those things should rather be hand traps, which is why this deck, in my opinion, is so much fun, is because the side deck really changes the whole experience. You can side out large parts of the engine for, let's say, a big hand trap package or a going first package, or maybe even side in some extra crossout targets, right? Dimensional barrier is going to be used on you if your opponent knows what they're doing. And so if you can cross that out, that's really, really incredible. But like I did say, there is a going first package as well. So I think this is kind of fun. So these are kind of some of your going second options, but for going first, we have Trap Trick plus double Metaverse, which is access to more of our field spells, which means basically our floodgates. But then arguably the spiciest card in the side deck is Grisaille Prison. So it is a little bit win more, I will say. And is it better than Dimensional Barrier? Yes and no. The way this thing is worded, it says, if you control a face-up monster that was tribute, ritual, or special summoned, until the end of your opponent's next turn, neither player can Synchro or XYZ summon. Synchro, XYZ monsters cannot attack. Also, their effects are negated. So until the end of your opponent's next turn means if you're doing this on their opponent's turn, on your turn afterwards, and their next turn, they will be under this lock. So this does not hit every deck, obviously. But if you are going up against Purely or, I don't know, Goblin Riders, whatever, like, right? There's random Synchro and XYZ strategies that this thing just stomps on. And so because of that, I think it's a really fun one to play. And it is basically one-sided. So, until you're, obviously neither player can Synchro XYZ, but this is if you're already using a tribute or ritual monster. So, or fusion, which is what we're actually trying to do here, right? We're sticking a Dragoon. We're hoping to have either this or a Floodgate, but this is a lingering one, which is just so nasty. So I think that there are some unsuspecting opponents out here who are ready to get wrecked. I definitely have some fun replays that we'll get to show off some of the whole deck in action, including how the siding patterns work. We'll take a look at a few matches, but yeah, that is our Red Eyes Dark Dragoon deck. A long time in the making, but and by no means complete, right? I think that this deck has some upward potential. Is it really, competitive, tier 1 or even 2? Probably not, but it's fun. I don't know. The format's so weird that I'm definitely making a stronger push towards more casual play, and this is exactly the way I would like to play the game right now. So anyways, thanks so much for checking this out. Peace.